I think we've given everyone a couple of minutes to join now, so I think we'll get started and get the show on the road. So thank you all so much for joining us. Many of you may know me. I'm Effie Ganaris, one of the associate directors at Templeton Partners. Really privileged to be representing Templeton on this webinar session. And many of you may know that work with us. Templeton are just over 23 years old as a business, and we operate worldwide as true technology specialists in over 40 countries. Obviously recruiting in very traditional technologies, but more recently with such a huge demand of AI, machine learning, automation and robotics. This really is a hot topic to kick off our Templeton Talks Tech series, and our first session is on AI and automation. So thank you all so very much for joining us. AI as a subject was actually introduced way back in the 1950s, but it didn't actually create much noise back then. Today in 2020, we hear something new and exciting about AI and automation and machine learning every single day. Only last week, Microsoft announced a supercomputer, and these computers, anyone who wants to look into it, there's lots of news about it out there. They really do elevate where AI and machine learning and automation is heading in our very own reality. So it really is super exciting to be able to host a webinar that really talks about how humans, have always leveraged off of machines to help us achieve our goals. But for the first time, we're really now able to build machines that have intelligence. And it's a real privilege to introduce Dr. Steve Sheppard, CEO and founder of Combined Intelligence, who'll be talking to us about automation, and Professor Andy Pardoe, Chief AI Officer and Chairman at Combined Intelligence, who will be speaking to us about artificial intelligence. Just a little bit about Steve and Andy. Steve actually has a PhD in the application of artificial intelligence, specifically to medical image diagnosis. With over 25 years in the industry, he's led so many businesses in various industries through digital transformations and implementations of automation and artificial intelligence. He was the head of automation at Capita and created their Capita Automation Center of Excellence. Really great stuff. And what Steve will be covering for us today is automation in lockdown, and how automation has actually helped organizations cope with the impact of COVID-19. And he'll also touch on the impact of automation as we come out of this phase of lockdown. How is automation going to be prioritized within business, and how will it help organizations operate moving forward? Andy's going to speak to us after Steve on artificial intelligence. Andy, Professor Andy Pardoe is a professor of AI from Warwick University. He's worked in the industry for over 20 years, and he's always seen artificial intelligence as the most advanced form of technology and the key to empowering humans to fully benefit from smart applications of technology. And for those of you out there that have ever received a speeding fine on the motorway, we have Andy to partially applaud for it, as he was the head of software at Rascal Messenger, where he actually worked on the first number plate recognition system for motorway cameras. So thanks for that, Andy. So Steve and Andy will be covering certain topics. Obviously, Andy will be focusing more on AI. He'll talk about how AI has been helping us fight against COVID-19, and AI and customer service, why customer experience is so much more important now than it's ever been, and how AI can help us leverage that, and also the AI journey and the road to recovery. We will be taking questions. Please feel free. I want this to be as very much as active as possible. Send in your questions during the sessions, and after Steve has spoken and after Andy has spoken, we'll take some questions So please feel free. It'll be great to hear from all of you. So without further ado, Steve, would you like to take the stage?
Thank you, Effie. Pleasure to be here, everybody, and nice to meet many of you virtually. I'm just going to share my slides, if Maura could stop sharing. So as Effie sort of so well introduced, the topic for sort of my area is automation. And what I'll try to do is explain how automation is having a positive effect while we're in lockdown, despite sort of the impact of COVID-19. But then also lead into how automation is going to evolve and the importance of it moving forward, and some of the challenges and opportunities we have, and linking in with evolving tech such as AI and other emerging technologies as we go forward. So as Effie did so well, you know a lot about me already in terms of my background. I've done, I suppose, for the last 15 years, a lot of work in the digital transformation space, leading a whole variety of programs, supporting how organizations transform their end-to-end business processes. Most recently, focusing around automation, but all really about how can we transform how we use technology to support the improvement in operations and service delivery within organizations. I'm co-founder with Andy of Combined Intelligence Limited. We're a consultancy business that focuses on intelligent technologies and how those technologies can be best be applied by organizations to realize the maximum benefit from the evolving tech and as they continue to grow in the future comes forward. Now, what I'll start with is just clarify what I sort of cover by automation. I suppose there's two major categories. There's what you might call physical automation, so manufacturing robots, autonomous vehicles, or even home robots as they continue to sort of evolve and sort of come into existence. And they typically automate physical operations that traditionally or historically people did. But now, certainly in the manufacturing sense, now these sort of tech is a lot better at doing it and a lot quicker than we are. But then there's the other side, there's process automation. So that's really around software and how software can interact with systems, with data, whether those business applications, with IT applications, and support the automation of those processes. Again, focused around traditionally what people have done. And one particular area of that is robotic process automation, which I'm sure many of you are aware of. RPA in particular has sort of grown out of the ability to interact through business systems using their user interfaces. Although strictly speaking, the technology can interface through the more traditional APIs or accessing data and systems in other ways as well. But the UI automation has been a particular focus, which has allowed it to grow quickly and to drive the adoption of the technology, because it can interact through the same ways as people interact with those systems, and allows us to fairly quickly replicate the operations people do by using those same operations without having to change those business systems to do that. But it's also worthwhile pointing out that it's not just RPA that you can use for process automation. You can use low-code platforms, you can use traditional middleware, you can even use system integration. And strictly speaking, that combination together is what really allows us to achieve the maximum potential out of process automation. Just a couple more terms to highlight that you probably have heard about and many of you might be involved with. If we combine process automation with artificial intelligence, then we have what's called intelligent process automation, where we're using AI to augment decision making, to allow us to interpret information better, really to enhance what we can achieve through the technology. There is also another term called hyperautomation, which I think was originally coming from Gartner, but has been adopted by a number of the platform vendors as a key evolution of the technology. And really, it's about that combination of intelligent process automation, so traditional RPA, for example, with AI, but then achieving scale across the organization. From our perspective, we look at it as also achieving transformation. So rather than focusing just on sort of task-based automation, and I'll come to that a bit more later, looking at how we can use automation to transform how an organization operates. And to a large extent, that also means sort of building it into its DNA. So it's where automation becomes a standard part of what a business does and how it operates, rather than it being something that comes along after to help improve the efficiency of certain processes within the business. So that's really the goal, is hyper-automation. And that at that point, you can achieve the full potential and the maximum benefit out of automation. But let's focus on the here and now. Obviously, coronavirus has had a big impact on organizations and on how we work as individuals. But if I look at some of the positives in terms of how automation has helped, then there are many articles now, many sort of examples where automation has helped businesses cope and been able to react quickly to the impact and the needs of those businesses to be able to support specific operations. And I'll just run through a few examples that we've seen and sort of captured through the industry. So it's an example of a bank that's used automation to process loan applications. So as we sort of all appreciate, a lot of businesses are going through challenges. The need for those businesses to improve their cash flow and take out loans has significantly increased. And that volume and being able to cope with that in a very short period is something that, using RPA in this case to help automate and do it quickly, has added significant value and allowed the volume to be processed that wouldn't have been possible using the human workforce. Another industry that's been impacted specifically is the airline industry. Unfortunately for them, they've had to cancel their flights. That's meant customers want to cancel their bookings and get a refund. Again, the volumes that's introduced far exceeded the capabilities of their standard customer services team, for example, to cope with that. And it's another example where automation has come in and allowed the rapid processing of high volumes of transactions. And that's one of the benefits of using sort of automation, using technology, is that it's a lot easier to scale it out than it is to scale out a human workforce. Another example, this is in telecoms, this case, but it's really about customer service and customer contact. Again, it's been impacted by the virus. The workforce has been impacted. Yes, a lot have been able to work from home and sort of migrate there, but equally the volume of people available to deal with customer contact, and in many cases the volume of customer contact has gone up. And the use of technology to help the efficiency of the frontline staff again has delivered benefits. Another example around online retail, coping with sort of job applications in the insurance industry, supporting that transition to suddenly having high volumes of people working remotely. Medical devices, obviously key in current times, supporting the efficiency in the process around supply chain and order management. And even more close to home, pharmaceuticals, and supporting how the whole drug application process and testing process can be done efficiently. But it's not always positive. So some of you may have heard about an example in the US where the government introduced a new loan scheme, and a lot of organisations used RPA to quickly put in place a system that will allow them to bulk send applications through to this government agency. One of the challenges, they used UI automation that was driving this website, and that website crashed fairly quickly when it got turned on. And it wasn't that the underlying application couldn't cope with it, but it was because the user interface, which was designed for a moderate number of human beings to interact with, couldn't cope with the scale and the volume of the technology hitting it. And they had to turn off that. But they did actually have an API, and they did have a traditional way of integrating that was up to the performance of it. So it's an example of how a bit of thought needs to go in of how automation is applied in order to be able to get the full benefit out of it. But one sort of highlight I'd sort of leave through this is that, and this is a quote from the CEO of Microsoft, is that they saw within 2 months, 2 years equivalent of digital transformation. Digital transformation has been around for a number of years and has been driven across organisations, but the need for people to transition to working remotely, to utilise digital technologies, has massively pushed that over the last few months. Now, I'm sure, because I know we've got a broad audience here of some people who are sort of experts in this field and sort of leading on the automation and AI fronts, but I thought I'd quickly run through why we automate. And it's a whole bunch of reasons that can range from how we can improve the interaction with the customer and improve the experience, whether that's about enhancing the way we communicate, enhancing the responsiveness of what we do, but overall we can improve that engagement and that experience. We can also support the end-to-end delivery of service more efficiently by automating and speeding up the various different stages of those processes to be able to deliver service, whatever that happens to be, or deliver product in the most efficient and effective way. Some of that is through the reduction in lifecycle time and increased throughput. But it's also around other things. So one of the key drivers around RPA originally was the opportunity to remove the mundane work from people. So from the employees who perhaps every day have to come in and do the same thing multiple times. And I've worked in a number of organisations where we've had teams of 50 people effectively doing tasks that might only take them 2 minutes, but they do that thousands of times. Prime opportunities where actually we end up with mistakes, we end up with errors, and actually we don't achieve a very good quality at the end of it, because actually people aren't really great at doing that and actually don't really like and aren't really enthused by that type of work. So it's an opportunity to take that away, to allow people to focus on higher value tasks, with the potential then to increase employee satisfaction. We also, as I sort of mentioned in some of that, have the opportunity to use the technology to work where people aren't quite so good, perhaps, and use it to improve accuracy, quality, consistency, and reliability of both the process and the data that we utilize through that process. We can also gather a lot more data around the life cycle of these processes and the services that we're delivering, and use that to give us business insight, to give us more information, better understand the customer, to better understand how we're operating, and then ideally feed that into a continuous improvement program that will again lead to the further opportunities for transformation and automation. Some of the other elements that we can do around reducing risk by enhancing compliance, but also the opportunity to increase sort of business resilience. So one of the benefits I was talking about earlier was around how we can use automation to scale up when suddenly we have high volumes of things. Automation as well, and the technology hasn't really been affected directly by the virus, whereas the human workforce has obviously been massively impacted by that. So that is one of the drivers, I think, that will sort of move forward to drive further automation. Other benefits around security, and how we can use the tech if we do it correctly. And obviously a lot of this is around doing this correctly and well so that we can enhance security. And I suppose the last one, which in some cases is seen by some organisations as the primary driver, it's about reducing operating costs. I think the organisations that look at the bigger picture and look at the whole collection of opportunities to deliver benefit are the ones where they can also benefit from growth through automation and improvement in the whole sort of customer experience, customer life cycle, and the employee side of things as well. And that combination of benefits, and we always encourage the application of value to all these other benefits beyond just looking at it as sort of operational cost reduction. So those have always been the benefits for automation. But how do you actually get to that level and achieve all those benefits? And we've sort of written a bit of a knowledge article, which you're welcome to read on our website, which talks about the automation journey in a series of steps and a series of stages, where we're transitioning from an initial understanding and need that we identify for automation, through specifying a vision, identifying what we think the potential is and what we want to achieve from automation, going through pilot, achieving some initial benefit through live automations. And then this is sort of where some organisations start to struggle, which is that transition into scale, that use of advanced automation to really pick up much more complicated processes to deliver the real scale of benefit and the scale of automation to deliver significant change to the business. Is a challenge, and some organisations have struggled with that. And I think there's some statistics out there that sort of somewhere in the region of about 40% of automation programs fail to achieve the full benefits they're expecting. We then talk about adding intelligence, combining with other technologies like artificial intelligence, like augmented analytics, chatbots, and so on, to actually then extend the scope of what we can achieve with automation, before we then transition to that business-wide, full-scale, embedded within the DNA, hyper-automation level. So let's just sort of pick up back on sort of the impact on COVID-19. What you can read now is a whole variety of articles that are sort of thought articles that have been published by journalists, by specialists in the field, that really are highlighting that the virus is going to push automation. And it's really forcing organisations to do it due to the impact on the human workforce. And ultimately due to the impact on the bottom line, how well financially the organisation is performing, the driver to reduce costs, to improve efficiencies, because we now have less people perhaps available to do this work, and ultimately to increase the resilience of the organisation should this occur again, or we have similar challenges in the future. So what that's meaning is, over the coming months, a lot of organisations are going to have to make some fairly significant decisions around recruitment versus automation. I was reading an interesting article around about the US, and they have had a high volume of unemployment. Obviously in the UK we've got the furlough scheme, which perhaps is reducing the direct impact that we're seeing at the moment, but there is a risk when that starts to disappear that we may have a greater impact. But there will be decision to make about whether these organisations start to bring back recruits and bring people back into the organisation, or will there be more of a drive for automation? And I think that's one of the challenges, and it will no doubt be a combination of the two that organisations will look at, on where they're going to put their investment and how they're going to use that moving forward to sort of recover. And a key element of that, linked in with that recruitment, is around skills, around training. Well, perhaps we might want to bring people in, but do we need to transition their skills? Do we need to look at people who are more focused around automation, the technologies, than perhaps less on sort of the front line? And one of the opportunities, and I'll talk about citizen developers in a minute, about how we can broaden the capability to implement automation across the teams and the structures, and that's through training. So Picking up on the sort of towards hyper automation. So this is what we want to achieve. One of the key steps is around achieving scale. And one of the, I think the key things is that transition from what I would call task-based automation. So this is where automation has quite often gone and worked with a department, it's worked with a team, it's found opportunity to automate the processes that a person does or a team of people do, but within that department. And realistically speaking, that sub-process or task is part of an overall end-to-end business process. And if you're really looking at scale, you're looking at how you can transform that end-to-end process. And I think that transformation is linked in with digital transformation. It's that combination of automation with other technologies, with other business changes, whether that's operational, whether that's through technology. That's the way you really get the maximum benefit. You know, there's plenty of examples that I've seen of end-to-end processes where if you just focus on automation of task, you're missing the potential to achieve a lot greater value. It may be that if you improve how you gather information further up the process, you'll get a lot more benefit from the scale of automation you can achieve within that departmental process you're currently looking at. Equally, you might have an impact further down the line, perhaps on the quality checking that might go on. Well, actually, we might be able to do that as part of the automation in the original process. I mentioned citizen developers. So this is a relatively new concept. So this is the principle that traditionally automation has been done through a centre of excellence with a team of specialists who have gone out and visited different parts of the business to identify where they can apply automation, to work with the local teams there, but really the implementation is done through that central function. Citizen developers is a concept that's promoted by a number of the platform vendors, where they've tried to simplify the tools to allow, I think, what they call tech-savvy operational staff who are trained in the tech to be able to implement and first of all, to be able to identify good opportunities for automation, which is one of the key challenges, but also then to be able to do some of that implementation. That may be in support of what they do, it may be in support of what their team does, and it may contribute to the wider pool of automations that goes through the central automation function to become an enterprise-wide automation that's supported through that. But it's a way of extending the reach and the scale and the capability of automation. We're also keen around design thinking and how you actually now need to start thinking about scale, about reuse, about availability, maintenance, because actually all of those issues can become a problem once you transition to small volume of automations to a high volume. And that's something that we're sort of particularly keen on and sort of happy to talk to anyone about. Cultural change all goes along with this sort of technology-driven change. What you need to get to is an acceptance that automation and this growing digital workforce is here to stay. It needs to be part of a digital transformation. It needs to be a key pillar of that, but an acceptance that you might be doing changes on how you interact with customers at the front end. You might have an AI vertical as well as a pillar. You might be having a variety of business change through that as well. But the whole thing needs to be seen as a positive for the organisation and its employees, and part of that messaging and that upselling of what we're doing, what we're achieving is the key to achieving real benefits. And what you'll also see is some of the vendors are actually pushing a bot for every person. So this is the concept that every individual should end up with a bot on their desktop that will support what they do as an individual, to automate some aspects of what they do. And if you look at every individual, you know, the view is that perhaps, you know, if you could automate just 10 or 20% of what they do, then you'll deliver a massive value to the business. There are challenges around that, though, and that's a topic for a much wider conversation. Picking up, and this, Andy will go into this in a lot more detail, we're talking about artificial intelligence and the combination with automation, where we can use things like machine learning to go beyond the rules-based automations that we traditionally do. So to use it as part of decision-making, it to learn what's been happening in the past, but then also to be able to make decisions in the future. They're a lot more complicated or a lot more aligned with what a person would do in terms of making a decision through this without actually having to pass over to a person. There are technologies like conversational AI, natural language processing, natural language understanding, linked in with things like chatbots and smart devices that allow us to interact with people in a different way. And those interactions can then lead to automations to process what the customer, for example, was engaging us with. We can also process traditional documents, for example, a lot better using AI, where we can not only sort of interpret the text doing intelligent character recognition, but we can actually then use that to understand what the meaning is and what the context is within that, and use that to then automate a process off the back of it. Another aspect is computer vision. Computer vision is actually embedded within a lot of the sort of RPA tech, for example, at the moment, where it interacts with user interfaces through things like Citrix, and it can better understand that technology and better allow us to automate processes through that. Andy will go through that in a lot more detail. I'll try not to steal his thunder at this point. Another sort of related area is analytics. Augmented analytics is sort of the combination of analytics with AI. Automation allows us to gather a lot more information, but there is also an awful lot of information that can be looked at and understood through analytics that can then be used to give us predictions and leading into more of a prescriptive analytics. And prescriptive analytics is where we use that analytics to actually aid us in decision making. And that might be able to sort of predict something and then kick off an automation to actually do something about it, rather than just present the information in some nice visual way to someone to look at and cogitate on. We also have more exciting technologies coming along. So the advent of 5G, for example, will allow us to have a much more responsive and high volume data interaction with people, whether that's through combined sort of distributed IoT devices or through new capabilities on smartphones. That will then link in and enable us to do more behind the scenes and process things automatically. One that I like is the whole concept of sort of virtual reality and augmented reality, because ultimately we've all lost, for example, the office experience. At the moment, we go on Zoom, we can see people on screens and so on, but it's not quite the same. How long before we sit here with our augmented reality or our virtual reality headset on, and actually we're now in a virtual office? So we can still interact with people. We can still, have that coffee moment. We can still engage, but we're not having to physically be there. All of those sort of things are exciting and opportunities that then will drive into automation. Blockchain's been around for a while. It's been adopted in certain areas, Bitcoin, etc. But there's a lot of opportunity to use it in things like supply chain, and then link that in with how we manage and interact and keep track of all of that supply information that goes through a full life cycle, and we can use that through automation combining with blockchain. Now, I probably talked for too long, but Andy's good at doing a shorter one. So what I just sort of end with is one of the rewards of attending, and hopefully it's all a good experience, is that we're offering to have some virtual workshops with anyone who's interested around automation and AI, and just to talk around the potential and the opportunity within your organisation and what you can achieve. And if you're interested in that, please follow up with your Templeton contacts, and they will, we'll follow up, to be honest, together as well to see whether you're interested and sort of follow up with there. But at this point, I will stop sharing and I will hand over to Andy. Fire Effie, I think.
Hi, Steve. Yes, thank you for that. Very, very interesting. And it's quite, you mentioned quite a few industries, the pharmaceutical, medical device, telecommunications, manufacturing in general, all industries that need to jump on the automation bandwagon, because they don't want to be left on a burning platform, as the Microsoft CEO so delicately put it last week in his blog. We do have some questions, if you don't mind, Steve.
Yeah.
A really good question from Mark Hodes, the CIO of AB Sugar, part of ABF Group, and a very good friend of mine. His question is, could you please explain your view on business process redesign in relation to IPA, intelligent process automation? you don't want to automate bad processes using a BPR framework.
Yes, and I'll sort of pick up on that automate bad processes. I would totally agree. And I think that has been a failing with some organisations where their focus is around automating the as-is, and you can get some benefit of that, and you can achieve that benefit quickly. But actually, if you've got a rubbish process, even when it's automated, it's still a bit rubbish. So what you really want to do is do that, take that opportunity to go, well, that is a bit rubbish. Let's understand why it's a bit rubbish. And actually, if we look at the bigger picture as well, can we redesign this process and hopefully sort of going slightly wider than the sort of departmental view, and capture a new and improved way of working through that end-to-end life cycle. And I think that is key. In terms of the tool, there are a variety of tools that are sort of dedicated to BPMN and sort of mapping and drawing out those. What you will also find is that a number of the platform vendors now are embedding those capabilities within their platform. One of the biggest challenges and one of the things that can slow down automation, and in many cases for good reason, but in other cases you can get bogged down with paperwork, is the time it can take to actually capture and document these end-to-end processes, particularly when you're doing process re-engineering. So it's running that fine line with doing enough re-engineering, but perhaps being a bit agile and doing some incremental implementations through the tool, and that combination of the tool to document plus a higher level business process that you might capture in another sort of process design tool. Hopefully that answers the question.
Thanks, Steve. We also have another question. How important are citizen developers that you mentioned earlier on?
I think to make that transition from being constrained with a central function, which ultimately will only have a comparatively small pool of resource compared to the scale of the organisation, the opportunity for citizen developers is to allow them to understand the technology and to be able to utilise that in the context of the part of the operation that they work in to find opportunities. How those opportunities then get implemented and then transition into a fully robust, at scale, automated process is really up to the organisation and how the Centre of Excellence wants to work with that operation function. There are processes where actually they're relatively easy to implement, they're quick to do, it's more cost effective actually if the local team do them and maintain them than trying to encapsulate them in a big central function, because chances are they won't get done otherwise. So you need that combination to both scale out and achieve the full benefit if you can.
Thanks, Steve. Introducing Andy. Andy, welcome. We look forward to hearing from you in terms of AI, and any questions, please submit them via the chat link. Hi, Andy.
Okay, thank you, Effie. Let me just share my screen now. Hopefully this will work. Let me know if you can see my slides. Hopefully you can.
Yes, all fine. Go ahead.
Fantastic. Okay, well, thank you all for joining this session. So very briefly on a little bit about my profile. So Effie mentioned my first job after doing my PhD in AI was actually working for a company developing number plate recognition system. And we use that for motorways, speed cameras, but also for police cars and car parking applications as well. I then moved into London and worked for about 20 years in the financial services sector, and then spent a couple of years working with Accenture, working across industry groups. And so that's my background. I've been lucky enough to be an advisor to a film documentary called We Need to Talk About AI, which is currently available on Amazon. I believe other streaming platforms do exist, but it's available on Amazon at the moment. Definitely worth a look. I'm going to be launching my own the Future of AI podcast very soon, so watch out for that. And I also have a free sort of festival ticket to CogX for the best question of the session. So start putting in those questions into the chat. So I wanted to talk about a few things. So first of all, really just talking about how technology and specifically AI companies have really sort of rise to the challenge with COVID-19. And it's been actually quite impressive how many companies have been seeing how they can use their technologies to support the fight against COVID. And it's been quite inspirational to see the efforts that a number of companies have sort of put into that. And there's a few examples here that are part of the NVIDIA sort of ecosystem, and these are sort of startups, and it really touches on a number of different areas. So the first area, which I think is sort of critical for every business really, it's how do you manage your data? How do you actually get your data to the right people at the right time? How do you draw out that analytics and insight? And that's a key element of any business. And I think, you know, during this crisis, that's becoming more and more important. They actually run, so this is the Whiteboard platform. It's an IoT platform, but they've used a lot of computer vision to actually help in a number of areas. So firstly, to track the use of PPE within the hospital environments, but also using their thermal cameras to check on the temperature of people in the hospitals as well. There's other examples of companies where they've kind of leveraged their expertise in video analytics and applied that to how you model the interaction between chemicals, molecules, and proteins, and again, helping to try and find that sort of drug discovery and sort of helping to find a virus, a sort of a vaccine and a cure for COVID. So that's another area where companies have slightly pivoted their skill set, but applying it to the problem. I'm aware of other companies, and a couple of the AI sort of vendors and platforms have been leveraging their capabilities to help with capacity planning and with resources, and that can be from the capacity of ICU units, but also on the supply chain and the sort of the PPE that they have, and actually using predictive analytics to help model how the outbreak of COVID-19 is spreading across the globe and where the demand will be for various resources. So that's a really interesting sort of way in which AI is really sort of helping us to understand the virus and also to sort of fight it. NVIDIA actually have 870 med tech companies as part of their ecosystem, and there are many more sort of outside of that are working in the med tech space. And a lot of people think that AI and medical applications are actually quite new, but actually, you know, there's been companies working in this space for quite some time. Another interesting application is a company that I know quite well, and they've been applying their sort of AI capability on chest X-rays and being able to essentially predict very quickly and diagnose very quickly whether someone has got a case of COVID-19. And they're using a very interesting technique. So rather than trying to identify the actual disease, what they do is try and identify what's normal in an image. And so they've got a technique called red dots, and as you can see on the image on the right-hand side, they're actually highlighting an area that they don't believe is normal, and that's part of their diagnostic capability. So it's an interesting approach to the problem of trying to get a enough examples of a particular diagnosis, and they're taking a different approach to that, which is quite interesting. The next thing I wanted to really highlight was essentially both AI and automation is nothing without data. And I think having good quality data and analytics around that is really important. And I think what you're going to see as companies come out of the survival and into the recovery side of the impacts of COVID is you're going to see an increase in importance of understanding your customer. And I know from my work in the finance industry that banks were already sort of looking at how they could both consolidate their information internally, which is essentially the customer 360 view, if you like. So making sure that you've got a good understanding of all of the interactions that all of the different areas of your bank or your company, doesn't just apply to the banking industry, has on the customer, but also taking not just your internal data, but taking external data as well. And that's the 720 sort of view of your customer. And Exmotis is a company, startup that I'm working with, that is really trying to help with that analytics and trying to sort of pull in relevant industry or company information that's sort of in the public domain that can help inform you about your customers, about your industry, and really give you that added insight at your fingertips that can really help understand your customers and understand, give you that capability to look at opportunities for sort of cross-selling and upselling, and just having that context on your customers. And I think that will be a massive, increasingly important thing for companies in all industries to focus on over the next sort of 6 to 12 months for sure. And then I think the other sort of key thing really is about the future of work. And even before the crisis, there was lots of talk about, what is automation and AI doing for the future of work? And I think now we've got two key drivers that are really going to accelerate that. And Steve talked about the quote from the Microsoft CEO about how much the digital transformation has accelerated over the last couple of months. And I think that, combined with the economic volatility and a very sort of dynamic environment, not least with the impact of remote working and the reduced workforce due to illnesses, there's going to be an increasing need for augmented workforce. And I think that's just the new reality of our working environment, that we're going to see more and more augmented workforce in the future, and not just in the customer engagement area either. So augmented workforce, and this is a slide from one of our partners who specializes in intelligent virtual assistants, in that sort of early sort of pre-sale and post-sale activities. And, this is an area that's already picking up interest, and they're seeing, increasing demand for this. This is an area that I think with the crisis, and there's an example of how this has impacted companies in terms of their customer support. So there's been companies that have leveraged offshore customer service centers, and they've struggled when those countries have had to go into lockdown and their staff have had to work remotely. They haven't necessarily had the best internet broadband capabilities in other countries that we might sort of see as normal in the UK. And so their customer support and customer service really struggled during the crisis, because they had a much reduced interaction capability there. So having this augmented and intelligent virtual assistant capability is really important. And the interesting thing with this is we have already started to see this being used not just in that sort of front office customer service area, but throughout the entire value chain. So, you know, and I think this is going to be increasing pressure on companies to not just use it in that initial sort of interaction with their customers, but also use it throughout their sort of company and throughout the different departments within the company. And that's actually one of the benefits, but also one of the challenges of AI is that you can actually use it across the entire value chain of an organization. And that's a blessing and a curse, to be honest with you, because what that tends to do is create a lot of siloed and fragmented implementations of different AI capabilities. And one of the challenges then is how can you share things across different departments to accelerate your adoption across different areas. And you see this, or I've seen this an awful lot, where you get that very siloed approach to adoption of data science and machine learning, and you end up each team doing a very separate thing, using their own tools, their own processes, and it becomes very difficult for those to then sort of share across the sort of organizational boundaries of the different departments. And that essentially can slow down the adoption further. So that's a real challenge. And you know, it's one of the many challenges that companies will face with their sort of adoption of AI as they sort of look to scale up. One of the other things that I think we'll start to see as well as we sort of go from survival to revival to thriving as a nation, as a world, as we start to try and look to the future and enable companies to deliver a more robust capability, is they'll look to automation, they'll look to AI, but they'll go through this learning curve, if you like, of leveraging an increasingly complex solutions and to solve an increasing complex set of problems. And this is, again, part of the normal adoption journey, but this is something that we'll see as companies get through the crisis and look forward. They'll start to look at leveraging more AI to give them more capability to make their business processes more robust, to give them more flexibility in what they're doing, and they'll start to adopt increasingly more complex capabilities as they sort of get through that process. And this really is, for us, is about the AI journey. And I know from experience, different industries are at different stages of their AI adoption, and different companies within those industries, again, will be early adopters or sort of a more sort of controlled adoption of the technologies. I've mapped out a 10-stage adoption, a roadmap, if you like, and throughout all of these stages of scaling up and adopting AI within your organization, there will be a whole bunch of different challenges that causes friction in that adoption. And, you know, this is one of the things that many companies struggle with as they start to roll out their use of the technologies. And it's a whole range of challenges. It's not just about the technology, it's also about the culture, it's about the governance, it's about the organizational structure. There are many factors that are causing roadblocks, if you like, into the smooth adoption of the technology. I think I'm going to stop about there. So I think we've only got a few minutes left. So I'm going to hand back to Effie to see if there's any questions.
Thanks, Andy. That was great, and really really good to hear about kind of data and analytics. I've been hearing a lot over the past few months that data is the new oil. So it's great to see how that ties in quite nicely with AI. And I do have a question from Andrew Reed on the topic of data analytics. So on the topic of data analytics-based solutions, such as mentioned with Xmatus, how mature do you believe the market is today? And to what extent do you foresee this moving into behavioural analytics as companies look at leveraging this area more closely and adopting solutions? Also, is this an AI-focused area or more deep learning related? Great question, Andy. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. So personally, I think the whole area of data analytics and getting insight out of data is an ongoing battle for companies. And as I mentioned, some of them even struggle just to get a full representation of their customers from the different departments within the organization. So I think that's part of the struggle. I think I know that some companies were looking to implement a customer 720 platform or capability, but it's very early stages. I think those companies are very forward thinking and further on the sort of AI adoption than maybe others. But I think it's something that we'll start to see a lot more of. But behavioral analytics is really interesting, and I've seen examples of that being used in all sorts of places. And I think, again, we'll see more of that. I think behavioral analytics is actually provides some ethical considerations and concerns that needs to be thought about a little bit. But I think you'll definitely start to see more behavioral analytics. And that's both from behavioral analytics with customers, but also with your own internal staff as well. So I know of examples of it being used in HR as well. So it's a really interesting question. And yeah, behavioral analytics is sort of one of those really interesting areas.
Thank you, Andy. Great. So we don't run out of time. I'm just going to wrap up thanking Andy and Steve very much for their time. We are in a very privileged position to be able to offer everyone attending and any colleagues that you might want to invite to a similar session of a follow-up session, which involves Steve and Andy offering a discovery session. We will do a follow-up. We've already had, thank you so much for the inquiries that have already come through to share some knowledge with Steve and Andy, and there's been some great inquiries for discovery sessions. We'll be in touch to set them up, but we really want to thank you on behalf of Steve, Andy and Templeton for joining us today. Some really, really key issues and discussions that have been discussed around AI and automation. And I think what is really interesting is how, Steve, you touched on, upskilling people within automation and robotics, process automation, data analytics, all of these really vital skills that are going to have to be building workforces post-COVID. And here at Templeton, we're delighted to tell you that we're already working with a number of clients on building these teams and upskilling our clients in AI, automation and robotics, and we'll continue to do so post-COVID recovery and bounce backs. So we want to thank you very much for everything. We've had a few more questions through, so if we've got just a little bit more time, and then we'll also have the COGX tickets for the best question that Andy's going to pick. So one of the other questions, we've had quite a few. James, how do you see companies managing risk when AI is best used as part of the business decision processing, when ML models are a black box and cannot easily explain the reasoning for the outcome based on the data used for inference? Thanks, James Ackred. Great question.
Yeah, another good question. And I think this is, it's not just around the sort of risk elements of decision making, but just sort of from a regulated industry, decisions based off algorithms is quite an interesting area, and this is one I know from experience the regulators are getting more and more interested in. And you know, one of the challenges, as you mentioned, is some of the techniques are considered to be a black box, but there is more and more work being done around explainability of AI techniques and models. And a number of techniques are actually very easy to see the underlying decision criteria or the reasoning behind the decision. So it depends on the technique being used, and there's more and more work being done around the sort of being able to explain the reasoning with models. But I think for a company who wants to manage their own internal risk when it comes to customers, that's a decision that's internal, and they can just sort of manage that internally. I think you know, when it's a more direct impact on a customer where you've turned them down for a loan, for example, then obviously there needs to be more sort of understanding of the decision-making process there. And often these algorithms are just there to guide and recommend. It's not, you know, the human will still make the final decision with these things. It's a great question.
Thanks for that, James. James Ackred, thanks for joining us as well. Is the was the head of technology for 18 years at Microsoft, and spent a great deal of his time developing SharePoint a long time ago. So thanks for that question, James. If we've got time for one more question, we've got another question, a question from Loretto. Loretto, given the speed of digital adoption during COVID, surely we can and should expect a faster adoption of AI and similar solutions?
It's an interesting question. I'd like to hope so, but I think as I was trying to show with my roadmap, it's not a straight road, and it's not an easy process to accelerate the adoption of AI and to sort of get to that sort of scaled implementation in an organization. So I think while the demand will be there, it doesn't necessarily make it an easier task. So I think the demand will definitely follow, I think, from this crisis. But I think the solutions and the capabilities still needs a lot of consideration, and it's not just a technology problem. And I think that's something that companies need to think really long and hard about and understand how they're going to get there.
Fantastic, thanks, Andy. We've had quite a few inquiries for the discovery session. Thank you for sending those through. We will follow up with you. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. It's been a very refreshing session, and to be able to share it with all of you has been great. So thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, Andy, Steve. We really appreciate your time, and really look forward to working with you on digital transformation with us here at Templeton, and everyone who's joined today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you
so much, everybody.
It's been great. Thank you.
Okay. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.